Awesome. And I just want to give me one moment. Just apologies.
Okay, no problem.
And just minimize this all the way down. And Mr. Green, just one more time on camera. It's okay if I can record you and we can use this video?
Yes, you could use the video, and you promised to send me a copy, which I appreciate. Thank you.
Yes. Can you one more time give me your first, last name, and your position?
Right. My name is Gary Green. I'm the managing partner of a law firm in Philadelphia that is Sidkoff, Pincus Green. We're at 11th and Market.
And can you spell your first and last name?
Garygreen.
Okay. And we're talking today about the antitrust lawsuit that the Department of Justice today filed against Live Nation and Ticketmaster. Can you explain the basics of what this lawsuit is about?
Yes. In the 1800s, United States passed the Sherman Act, and over time they passed additional legislation that was designed to make it easy for small companies to compete in the market. The design of antitrust law is to make sure that prices are competitive and that people who are consumers have the greatest opportunity to make choices. More competitors, more choices. If using the laws as developed by the Supreme Court, the evils of a monopoly is that the monopolist can then set the price. That is, if there was only one company in the whole world that made popsicles, if you wanted a popsicle, they might charge you $20 for a popsicle. But if there are 1,000 companies that are making ice cream popsicles, then of course, if someone charged $10, another one charged $8, and someone charged $2, and if the quality was good, the one that had the lowest price with the best quality would win. So that's a concept of why the government, our government, and even in Europe, have passed laws against monopoly. Now, in addition to monopoly, there is, not to get too deep into the woods, there is a concept of the way a market is structured. So if you think of like a tic-tac-toe board, I'm going to take my hand down in a minute. Across the top are different layers, parallel layers of competitors. So again, I'm going to use the popsicle thing because that's easy for me to explain, and then I'll jump right back into Ticketmaster. So across the top, you have one company makes chocolate-covered popsicles, another one makes chocolate-covered popsicles, perhaps with almonds in it. Another one just has creamsicles, but there's each level has a different product. Some of them are very similar. That's across. That's the same level. But going down, again, in that tic-tac-toe thing, going down is each company has to buy milk. Each company has to buy sugar. So if any one of the companies along the horizontal line controlled all the milk, then the other companies would never be able to make popsicles. If one company on the top owned all the sugar, well, then the other companies would not be able to make popsicles either. So the concept is that you can not only have a monopoly by you owning all of the resources, and that's the first example with one popsicle company, but another thing you could do is, yeah, you have competitors, sure, but you own the essential supplies and other aspects, which they call the vertical market, going down. Now, Ticketmaster is being accused of everything. The government is saying that through Live Nation's subsidiary Ticketmaster, it has the largest amount of live shows across the entire country. And as a result of that, it's a monopoly. If you were a singer and you had a new record out and you wanted to have a live performance, you would have to go to Live Nation if you really wanted to get exposure. Because of that, going into what I said before about the popsicle analogy, Ticketmaster could say, okay, fine. You know, we're having a concert with this great new artist. It's $150 for the cheap seats and $1,000 for the expensive seats. Not only that, as the government alleges, Ticketmaster goes even further. Okay, you want to buy a ticket for $150 and sit way up in the rafters. Go ahead, but you also have to pay a transaction fee. You have to pay a ticket processing fee. So that $150 before you're done, because of all the fees, now it's $200, and you're still sitting way up top, where the performer is going to look like a jelly bean. Then they're also claiming that Ticketmaster and its companies also control the vertical markets, that they own the venues, that they, in order to, if there was a competing venue, they would buy the venue up. If there was, they also own contracts with artists, and they also have a giant promotion business. And one of the allegations in the complaint that the government filed is that when there were other companies that were promoting artists, that's just a little tiny part of Live Nation's business. But there was a company in, I believe it was Tennessee, that wanted to promote artists, and Live Nation got a hold of all the other the parties and basically said, boycott this company or you'll never work with us. And there are a slew of different things that Live Nation did, actions that it took, both in the horizontal market and in the vertical market, that is the suppliers, going back to the popsicle, the milk, the sugar, the popsicle sticks. In the case of Live Nation, who manages, who are the performers, how do you promote it, printing, everything that's involved in a concert. Live Nation, according to the government, either controlled or did some action in retaliation or against a competitor. Now I'll come to the last part. Let's go back to the popsicles again. Let's suppose that my popsicle company was so excellent that everybody wanted my popsicles, no matter what the price. They didn't care. Sometimes you see this in a fancy restaurant where you can't get a reservation for a year because the food is so good, or being in that restaurant has a status account. So that restaurant can charge whatever it wants because it never runs out of customers. Let's say my popsicle company was that great. I would have a monopoly because everybody will come to me, but it was a natural monopoly. It was a monopoly that I got because I was a better competitor. By contrast, if I went out and I bought up all the chocolate companies, if I bought the vanilla company, the milk companies and so forth, or if I bought up my horizontal competitor, I didn't have a natural monopoly. I had a monopoly because I took action, and that action is called predatory action. So that's what I would say in a nutshell is the best way to understand this lawsuit.
So essentially, the government is accusing Live Nation and through Live Nation Ticketmaster of not only trying to control, not only buying up the companies all across the top horizontal line so that it owns those companies, but then also trying to ice out the competition by controlling everything along in the vertical columns.
Right.
And essentially that's both to, and so instead of creating a natural competition, you're taking predatory actions to manufacture competition, but it's not really competition because you own everything, and they're being accused of threatening and intimidation and threats of blackballing and putting other companies out of business in order to gain control of the entire grid.
You could probably pass an antitrust exam in law school with that explanation. Yes, you've got it exactly right.
Okay, awesome. So the reason that, we've been obviously following this because, we love concerts and we love going to concerts, but also because Taylor Swift happens to have been born in West Reading, which is right across the bridge from where we work, which is in Berks County. the Eras Tour, I think, really brought this problem to light after the bungled way that they sold the tickets, the pre-sale versus the regular sale. And I
Right.
know that we're following the Senate hearings, and now there's this antitrust lawsuit. How valid do you think this antitrust lawsuit is? Just not only as an antitrust lawyer, but also as, someone, a consumer, someone who enjoys buying tickets and going to concerts themselves.
Right. So, the Taylor Swift concert situation is an example of what could go wrong with a monopoly, but the government probably would not win a case just because bad things happen to people that were trying to attend concerts of Taylor Swift. And let me see if I can explain that very briefly. Yes, because Ticketmaster is a monopoly, if the monopoly screws up, you can't go someplace else. If Ticketmaster did not do a good job in the way that it handled ticket sales for Taylor Swift's concert, you couldn't go anywhere else. It was one source. And of course, Taylor Swift had very few choices, even if she didn't want to have the concert there. The hearing before the Senate was a follow up because what happened is that a few years ago, Live Nation, when it acquired Ticketmaster and some other companies, had to convince the Federal Trade Commission that it would not be a monopoly, that this was there would still be competition, and that it was only trying to build a business, and this was a logical move, and there still would be vibrant competition in the rest of the concert industry. That never happened. Once they bought Ticketmaster, they had enough of a critical mass that they could then go out and knock off competition here, there, vertically, horizontally. And they were brought back before the Senate, the people from Live Nation, to say, you lied to us. You told us you were going to be a regular competitor, not a predatory competitor. And that's where that came about, where more information was developed in the hearing that gave the Justice Department the information that it needed. There are other factors that play into this whole concert scenario. Number one, because of the ease of the internet, there are companies out there that as soon as a Taylor Swift concert was announced, they hired people and swooped up all the tickets. So a large number of the concert goers were not buying their tickets from Ticketmaster. They're buying them from other companies that were either scalping it or just making a profit on what they acquired. That's another problem. And it is not necessarily related to the antitrust issue. That's a separate issue outside of the antitrust issue, which is why I say if it was just a Taylor Swift situation, Live Nation can come back and say it's not our fault. We sold tickets to people that applied for them. And then these people went out and they did all the bad stuff. They're the ones that screwed up. They're the ones that people tried to buy tickets from and they couldn't deliver. So, yes, the Taylor Swift situation certainly focused the public's mind on what's going on in the live concert business, certainly gave the public opinion that the Justice Department needed in order to go forward. Now, what the Justice Department is looking to do, by the way, this isn't a suit to get money. What the Justice Department is seeking to do is break up Live Nation. And I'll just give you two examples that I'm sure you and the viewers would be familiar with. At one time, AT&T owned all phone service. And the government went in on an antitrust case and broke it up into the regional Bell operating companies that had no relationship with each other and no relationship with AT&T. And AT&T just became another competitor. Additionally, if you remember, in the early part of the internet, Microsoft owned the browser and owned the browsing business. And the government went in and launched an antitrust lawsuit against Microsoft. And the end result was that you see Google has a browser and Microsoft has a browser, and Microsoft can not load in to a Windows system a program that will compete with some other company. Whereas before, if for example, Microsoft wanted you to use its photo product, possibly to go to try and minimize the sales of Adobe Photoshop, it could put a fabulous photo program on Windows. You would get it for free when you got Windows, and then you wouldn't be buying Photoshop. That would be something that the government would forbid, and it did do that when it broke up parts of Microsoft. What the government's trying to do now is break up Live Nation. Now, it's always difficult to predict what the final outcome would be. In my estimation, if the allegations are true, if the judges that are drawn to this case, which judges are random and different presidents appoint different quality of judges, but if the judges who are hearing this case at the district court level and then at the circuit court appeals level are going to follow the law as it exists now and as it's written, and if the Supreme Court follows the law and doesn't decide to change it, if those three things happen, I think the government would be very, very successful. I have not seen a case that had more elements of the things you could check off on as antitrust violations. Many cases are brought with just one thing, monopoly, or just vertical. You're in a anti-competitive way dealing with vertical. Here, every single aspect of the antitrust law is all combined in one case, and I think the government will be successful. And I take into account also what happened before the Federal Trade Commission, what representations Live Nation made about the outcome of its acquisitions, how there still would be competition. And I think that's going to play into the case as well.
Okay. And in what way do you think that will play into the case? Because they testified, because it was, during the application process, they had to testify under oath, or they had to file documents that the government can use, that they perjured them, that they were planning on perjuring themselves.
Well, let me put perjury into a context. Perjury is a statement about something that already happened.
Okay.
That is, you're misreporting dishonestly something that already happened. You can't perjure yourself about the future. So if I told you that I'm going to go meet with a client at 2:00, and I'm not meeting with the client at 2:00, or I get waylaid or something else happens, it's not perjury. Because even if I swore to God I'm meeting with a client at 2:00, that's not perjury. At 3:00, I said I met with a client under oath, and I didn't, that would be perjury. So it's not the perjury, it's that Live Nation painted a picture of what it intended to do, like a narrow channel. We're only going to go down this narrow path. We're never going to go swerving. And they're swerving. So they're not following what they said they're going to do, which is basically they got the permission under a promise, we're going to just go straight in the narrow, and they went all over the place. And I think that's going to be something that will play out. As I said, I think the government will prevail because they are a monopoly. And what the end result will be is that you'll, just like you have many, many cell phone companies now competing for your business. And that's where you got 5G. There was no reason for AT&T to spend a lot of money to improve cell phones if they owned all the business. And there was no reason when Verizon had a big giant chunk to worry about 4G, 5G. But when T-Mobile came out and these other companies and the little tiny companies came out and they all started offering deals, every cell phone company, the biggest and the smallest, had to compete because they were selling a commodity. And if you think about it, a ticket to a concert's a commodity. It's all the same. Everybody's selling seats. That's it. So in that case, you're going to have many different offers Maybe someone will bundle, buy 5 tickets and you get the 6th one free, or someone else will offer you other benefits. Buy a ticket, get a free hot dog. Whatever competition breeds, it's going to be different than it is now, where Live Nation and Ticketmaster could basically say to the performers, to the managers, to the people that sell at the venues, and of course to the guests, take it or leave it. My way or the highway. If the government's successful, all that's going to go out the window, and there's going to be a lot of competition, and people probably, if the antitrust laws work, will love it. They'll love the outcome of this.
So could that, so when we were talking about the popsicle, when you were laying out your popsicle example about how a company, if they owned everything, they could set like a little popsicle at $20 a pop, literally.
Right.
And could that also be considered, like, could price gouging also
Yes.
be a factor? Like, obviously price
Of course.
gouging, it's considered price gouging, right?
Right. So let's say that the venue, if you walked up to the venue, and I'm going to give you an example. Let's say that there was some guy that came out there and he said, my act is I could play Mozart on a harmonica. Now, I would imagine that's not going to draw a large crowd. But let's say that's what that guy was going to do. He goes there, they set the ticket price at like $10. Taylor Swift is going to be the next show, and they set the price at $100. Now, in that context, Live Nation and Ticketmaster will not be together. So, therefore, the negotiations that Taylor Swift has through her management to find out what the cost of the concert will be, how it will be promoted, how much money will be spent. Everyone's going to be a separate individual. You think of a map, a pin in the map, in order to put this whole show together. As a result, there probably will not be as much price gouging, but there could be, but not because of the setup. And let me see if I can explain that. The setup will be right now that it won't be because Ticketmaster is like at the top of the mountain and is able to throw down orders to everybody below. That won't be the reason for price gouging. You still have these people that could buy up all the tickets through drones using artificial intelligence programs. They could end up, as long as tickets are sold online, some people can just scoop up all the tickets and price gouge. They're called scalpers. And in some states, that's against the law, because that used to happen with prize fights. When you had heavyweight championship fights in a certain city, some people would go in, stand and get first in line, buy all the tickets, and then they'd sell them at a high premium over and above what the price was. And many states pass laws against scalping. But if you can get away with scalping, if some guy has a company in Uganda and he's going to buy all the tickets, he's not going to worry about the scalping law in Pennsylvania. He's just going to offer them on sale or for sale on the internet at a higher price. But that gouging will not be because of a monopoly power, any competitive behavior by the top. It would be another problem, as I mentioned before. If that happens, that will be addressed also.
Mm-hmm. So it's like monopolistic. It's like almost like monopolistic gouging versus, or internal gouging versus external gouging.
Okay, I like that. Yeah, that's a. I think you came up with a good category to name these things.
I'm sorry. I simplified things. That's part of my job, is to figure out how
I
to
think
like.
I think that's perfect. I like that.
And when we talk about internal gouging, and obviously the external gouging, you really can't, for whatever, obviously external factors can't really control those, but the internal gouging in a monopoly, which is what Ticketmaster Live Nation has essentially become, does that apply? Would that, and if that breaks up, would that also break up like even the gouging that the monopoly is doing to like vendors, like arenas?
Yes, everything. This will be like, just think of Ticketmaster and Live Nation as 10 bowling pins, And now the government is an expert bowler, and they're going to get either a strike or they're going to knock down most of the pins. Nothing looks the same. If you looked at the pins standing up, that's one view. But after the bowling ball hits, most of the pins are laying on the ground. Maybe all are, maybe a few are standing. At the end of the case, that's what it'll look like. If the government is totally successful, all the pins will be knocked down and they'll all be separate entities. If Live Nation is able to convince the court that some areas shouldn't be broken up, it'll be look like bead bowling. Maybe 4 pins go down and 6 standing, something like that.
So if the government is 100% successful at the Southern District of New York, let's say a court of appeals, and then potentially ultimately the Supreme Court, if they're successful, they, batting 100,
Batting 1,000.
sorry, thank you. I'm sorry, my gosh, batting 1,000. If they're batting 1,000, what kind of message would this particular lawsuit possibly send, the success of this particular lawsuit possibly send to other areas in which there's a monopoly, like movie studios, music labels, media companies that are media companies? What kind of message would the success of this lawsuit that they send?
I think that the message is already there. It's sort of like the message out there is don't cheat on your income tax. And from what we understand, a lot of people do it on the theory that I won't get caught. And then if somebody does get caught, it makes people start looking at what happens in their own house and maybe it'll change it. One of the things that you'll find every year in late March is that the government will prosecute somebody that cheated in their income tax for maybe $2,000 to get across the message that even $2,000 you could get caught. So the fact that this is going on will send a message to some of the companies that are already threatened with antitrust violations, and they're in negotiations with the Justice Department or Federal Trade Commission. Google, for example, is in very serious negotiations, and Google already is having some problems as far as I can see from what I read, in the European Union, which has its own antitrust law. I think that Facebook had some issues and made some adjustments. So the law is already there. Remember, in order to get it to become a conglomerate, you have to convince the FTC that you're not going to be a monopolist. And even if you are a monopolist, you need to become a monopolist, otherwise you'll go out of business. So let me just make that other point. In some instances, there's only enough business for one company. And that's the only efficient way to run it. So you mentioned movie studios. The United States at one time had hundreds of different movie chains in cities all over the United States, and they all failed. And the only way that you could have live theater before COVID, at least, was if a couple of big companies controlled it. What's interesting is there was a case against the studios that own movie theaters, and the Supreme Court broke that up. They said you can't be both the producer of the movie and the shower, the exhibitor, and they broke that up. Then the next question became, well, what happens when it's not profitable to run a movie theater because of so many opportunities for people to see first-class entertainment at home due to streaming? Movie theaters really suffered because of that. Then COVID came along and it just pretty much wiped them out. A lot of the movie theaters went into bankruptcy. Their stock went down to the bottom, and it just became a disaster. And the only way the movie theater industry could stay alive was if they consolidated and became more economical and did cut down the competition. That is, how much they would have to pay for a new first run movie. But I don't know if the courts or Congress would tinker with that, because the result would be if you broke up the movie theaters now, you might not have any movie theaters. They all might go out of business. So the government usually goes after strong, profitable companies that are causing harm to consumers first and small competitors. If, by the way, there was a big company out there that was hurt or a medium-sized company, there's a chance that the government might not be interested. The big thing that starts an antitrust action, the battery behind it that pushes the current to make it look at the other areas, is there any detriment to consumers? That's what the Supreme Court said. Antitrust law used to be something small business can use without worrying about the consumers. And big companies convince the Supreme Court that, oh yeah, I'm making soda and I'm a sort of monopoly in this area, but because of my monopoly, consumers are getting their soda at a lower price. If you let me compete, everybody's going to pay more money. In those kind of cases, without the consumer getting suffering, the Supreme Court sort of allowed antitrust violations that prior Supreme Courts did not allow. So the law of antitrust has changed as more and more conservative Supreme Court justices took over and replaced the liberal justices. The only thing that became a factor for the Supreme Court was, did the consumer get hurt? Here you have consumers getting hurt in the Live Nation case, according to the allegations. And when you could bring the consumers in, then you could get all of it in, all of the violations, all of the levels of commerce where different companies are hurt. Whereas those companies may or may not have fared well in the Supreme Court if there were no consumer arguments also.
Mm-hmm. So, going off that vein, and I think this will be my final question, unless there's anything else you want to say after this. As both a lawyer and as someone who is a consumer, is this a lawsuit that you are happy the government is bringing? If even to not only continue to shore up those antitrust laws, but also continue sending a message that you can't do this.
I am thrilled that the Biden administration is following a very aggressive antitrust policy. I represent small and medium-sized companies that have been suffering as a result of the antitrust laws not being enforced by the courts. Again, the problem is conservative courts are being backed. The appointments are made by a president and approved by a Senate that are being financed in their elections by big companies, the giant companies. They appoint Supreme Court justices and other federal judges that understand why they got appointed. Their mission is, okay, the backers of the appointee want me to appoint her. The appointer gets backed by some big company, Live Nation, put on the court someone that's going to be favorable to the Live Nation and antitrust. If you perpetuate that year after year after year, then the little guy who has antitrust cases finds the barriers to winning harder and harder because at the top levels, the appellate courts are knocking off things that once were accepted as valid antitrust law, no longer. They're reversing them. What was bad, it's sort of like George Orwell's Animal House, where the pigs in the beginning said 4 legs good, 2 legs bad. And then by the end of the book, it was 2 legs good, 4 legs bad. That's pretty much what the Supreme Court has done with antitrust law. The Biden administration has aggressive antitrust attorneys who are now trying to test it and bring in the most egregious kinds of cases so that even conservative courts have to say, no, this has to get through. So I am thrilled that they're doing this. I think it's a great thing for the country. If we could bring back a vibrant, strong, vigorous antitrust law. I might point out that Europe has done that. Europe has not accepted the kind of milk toasty antitrust that the Supreme Court has put in place over the last few years, Europe has a vigorous antitrust enforcement, and it fosters competition in most cases.
Awesome. All right. Do you think we pretty much covered everything at this point, or is there anything else you would like to say?
No, I think that you asked very good questions. And as I said, you could probably pass a law school exam on antitrust. You mastered the topic in the half hour. That's pretty good.
That's really the only thing of economics I took away.
Okay.
Monopoly's bad, especially because even
No,
oligarchs.
no, I wouldn't say that. You know, you seem very adept at understanding the horizontal and vertical markets, and I think that's pretty good. I know some federal judges that still don't understand that.
Well, I'm glad to hear that. Thank you. And thank you very much for taking the time to
Okay,
speak to us. I
I appreciate it. Thank you.
Yeah, I will send you a copy of this as soon as we get off the call.
Okay, I appreciate that.
Of course.
Thanks.
Thank you. All
Bye.
right. Bye.